Blake Stafford froze in the doorway of his son's bedroom, his brain struggling to process the scene before him. The family's nanny lay motionless on the floor beside the bed, her face pale in the soft glow of the nightlight. And kneeling beside her, small hand clutching hers, was 6-year-old Miles, tears streaming down his cheeks as he whispered words that would haunt Blake for the rest of his life. "Don't leave, Miss Amara. You helped me sleep again. Please don't leave like Mommy did." Paramedics would arrive within minutes. The crisis would pass. But what Blake found in Amara's bag an hour later? Crumpled bills, desperate notes, evidence of sacrifice he'd never noticed, would shatter every assumption he'd made about the woman raising his son. If you've ever underestimated someone quietly sacrificing everything around you, comment below. This story will change how you see the helpers in your life. Blake Stafford's name carried weight in Silicon Valley. Billionaire tech investor, known for identifying unicorn startups before anyone else saw their potential. Ruthless in negotiations, brilliant in execution, legendary for turning struggling companies into industry dominators. His penthouse estate overlooked the bay, 10,000 square feet of marble glass and carefully curated art. Everything in his life was optimized, measured, efficient. Everything had an ROI, except the gaping hole where his wife used to be. Sarah had died 2 years ago. Sudden aneurysm, no warning, no chance to say goodbye. One morning she was making pancakes and laughing at Miles's dinosaur impressions. By evening, she was gone. Just like that, Blake became a single father to a 4-year-old boy who stopped sleeping through the night. Miles hadn't been the same since. Crippling anxiety. Nightmares that left him screaming. A fear of abandonment so profound that he'd panic if Blake left the room. The pediatricians recommended therapy, patience time. Blake threw money at the problem. The best child psychologists, the most expensive treatments, every resource money could buy. But money couldn't buy presence. And Blake's solution to grief was the same as a solution to everything else. Work harder. 80-hour weeks. Back-to-back board meetings. International flights. Anything to avoid the empty house and the son who looked at her with eyes that asked a question Blake couldn't answer. Why did Mommy leave? 6 months ago, Blake hired Amara Nichols. Impeccable references. Degree in early childhood development. Experience with traumatized children. She was exactly what Miles needed, which meant she was exactly what Blake could afford to delegate. He approved her paycheck every 2 weeks. Attended parent-teacher conferences when his schedule allowed. But the actual parenting? The nighttime tears and morning routines and endless small moments that build a childhood? He left that to Amara. He could quote quarterly earnings down to the decimal. But he couldn't tell you his son's favorite bedtime story. Blake came home at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday, early by his standards, late by any reasonable father's measure. He'd actually left a dinner meeting early, some instinct he didn't quite understand pulling him home. The house was too quiet. Usually, he could hear Miles's laughter or Amara reading in that animated voice she used for picture books. Tonight, nothing but silence pressed against the walls. He climbed the stairs, loosening his tie, telling himself everything was fine. Miles was probably already asleep. Amara had probably stepped out, but his heart was beating faster than it should, and his hand trembled slightly as he pushed open his son's bedroom door. Soft glow from the dinosaur nightlight Sarah had bought years ago. Miles's drawings taped the walls. When had there gotten to be so many? Blake had never really looked at them before. Stick figures holding hands. Bright suns and wonky houses, and a lot of hearts. Then he saw them. Amara collapsed beside Miles's bed, one arm stretched toward him as if she'd been reaching out when she fell. And Miles, still in his pajamas, kneeling next to her with both small hands wrapped around hers, his face streaked with tears. "Dad." Miles's voice cracked. "She won't wake up. I tried, but she won't wake up." Blake's world tilted. He lunged forward, fingers finding Amara's neck, searching for a pulse. There, faint but steady. Call 911. He barked at no one, already pulling out his phone, his other hand checking if she was breathing. She was, but her face was pale, her breathing shallow, and up close he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the hollowness in her cheeks. How had he never noticed how exhausted she looked? The 911 operator's voice cut through his panic. "What's your emergency?" Woman collapsed, unresponsive. Breathing but won't wake up. His voice sounded strange, desperate in a way billionaires aren't supposed to sound. "Please hurry. My son needs her." Not, "I pay her salary." Not, "She's an employee." "My son needs her." Hit like if you've ever realized too late how much someone was carrying for you. Because what Blake discovers next will wreck you. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. They worked efficiently, asking questions Blake couldn't answer. When was the last time she ate? He didn't know. Had she been sick? He wasn't sure. Any medical conditions? He had no idea. The housekeeper appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. "She's been with Miles every night this week," she told the paramedics. "He had a terrible flu, and she insisted on staying through. I don't think she slept in 3 days." Blake's stomach dropped. Miles had been sick? For a week? How had he not known his own son had been that ill? "Because you were in board meetings," a voice whispered in his head. "Because you were on a flight to New York for a pitch meeting. Because you delegated your son's life to someone you pay. Severe exhaustion," one paramedic announced. "Dehydration, malnutrition. When was the last time she had a proper meal?" Everyone looked at Blake. He had no answer. They loaded Amara onto a stretcher. Blake scooped Miles up when had his son gotten so big and followed them to the hospital. In the chaos, someone handed him Amara's satchel. "For emergency contact information," the paramedic said. In the hospital waiting room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, Blake opened the bag with shaking hands. He expected a phone, insurance cards, maybe a wallet. What he found instead made him stop breathing. Worn notebooks filled with Miles's artwork and detailed notes in Amara's neat handwriting. Tuesday. Miles slept through the night. No nightmares. First time in 2 months. Progress. Thursday. He laughed today. Real laughter. Haven't heard that sound in so long. Breakthrough. Colored pencils, stickers, small plastic dinosaurs. Tools for healing a broken child. Then, at the bottom of the bag, Blake saw them. Stacks of bills, red stamps screaming overdue. Electric, rent for an apartment he didn't even know she maintained. Credit cards maxed out to their limits. His hands trembled as he pulled out a bank statement. Regular transfers to Nichols Dialysis Center. Paper clipped to it, a note in Amara's handwriting. Payment sent to Mom's dialysis clinic. Rent can wait another month. Blake's vision blurred. The math assembled itself in his head with brutal clarity. He paid Amara $70,000 a year, industry standard for a live-in nanny in their area. He'd approved that salary 2 years ago without a second thought. Pocket change compared to what he spent on wine. But Amara had been sending almost everything home. Her mother was dying, needed dialysis 3 times a week, and insurance covered barely half. So Amara had made a choice. Keep her mother alive or keep herself comfortable. She chose her mother. Every time. Those simple meals she always requested, not preference, necessity. She was eating whatever was cheapest. Living in the staff quarters not because she had to, but because she couldn't afford her own place anymore. Never taking days off because she couldn't afford unpaid leave. And Blake had never asked, never noticed, never thought to wonder why his nanny never took vacations, or why she looked thinner every month, or why she sometimes fell asleep in chairs during Miles's naps. She'd been saving his son while barely surviving herself. Sacrificing sleep, health, financial stability, everything, to give Miles what Blake couldn't, presence. The tears came then. Great. Heaving sobs he hadn't cried since Sarah's funeral. This woman had given his son back his smile, his sleep, his hope, and he'd paid her barely enough to choose between herself and her dying mother. "Mr. Stafford?" A nurse touched his shoulder gently. "She's awake. You can see her now." Blake entered the hospital room, still clutching Amara's bag, like evidence at a trial. Miles held his other hand, so tightly his fingers were going numb, but he didn't care. Amara lay in the bed, for drip in her arm, looking impossibly small against the white sheets. When she saw them, she tried to sit up. "Mr. Stafford, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble." I'll be back to work tomorrow. I promise. Stop. Blake's voice cracked on the word. This man who commanded boardrooms and intimidated venture capitalists could barely speak. Please, don't apologize. Miles broke free from his father's grip and climbed onto the bed with the careful determination of a child who knows hospital rules but doesn't care. He buried his face in Amara's shoulder, his whole body shaking. You promised you wouldn't leave. You promised. Amara held him, one hand stroking his hair in that particular way that always calmed him. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm okay. Blake watched them, really watched for the first time. The way Miles fit perfectly in the curve of Amara's arm. The way she knew exactly where to rub his back to ease his anxiety. The way he trusted her completely. This woman who'd spent countless nights chasing away his nightmares while Blake chased the next deal. She knew Miles's feared his triggers, his healing process better than his own father did, because she'd been there every single night, while Blake was closing deals and building empires and telling himself he was doing it all for his son. Blake pulled a chair close to the bed, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. The doctor said you collapsed from exhaustion and malnutrition. Amara's cheeks flushed with shame. Blake hated that he'd put that look on her face. I found your bills, he continued quietly, holding up her bag, and the note about your mother. The shame deepened, and Blake felt like he might be sick. She was embarrassed that he discovered her poverty while working for a billionaire. Why didn't you tell me? Not accusatory, genuinely confused. Why didn't you ask for help? Amara's answer was simple, devastating in its dignity. You pay me fairly, Mr. Stafford. My choices aren't your burden to carry. The words hit him like a physical blow. She'd rather collapse than ask for help. Rather starve than seem ungrateful. Rather sacrifice everything than trouble the man who had everything. Blake thought about the watch on his wrist. Worth more than Amara made in a year. About the car in his garage he drove twice a month. About the wine cellar stocked with bottles that cost more than her mother's monthly dialysis. Things are going to change, he said, his voice firm with a decision that felt more right than any business deal he'd ever made. Amara started to protest. Blake held up his hand gently, the way he'd seen her do with Miles 100 times. Please, let me do this. Let me finally do something that actually matters. Blake's first call was to his accountant. Immediate paid sabbatical for Amara. 6 months, full salary, no strings attached. Second call, his lawyer. Complete coverage of her mother's medical bills, ongoing treatment expenses, and a visiting nurse to ease a burden. Third, Amara's salary tripled, comprehensive health insurance, and a housing stipend, so she never had to choose between rent and her mother's medication again. But Blake didn't stop there, because this wasn't charity. This was a reckoning. He called an emergency meeting with his executive team and household staff, reviewed compensation for everyone who kept his life running, and discovered the same pattern repeated everywhere he looked. The chef working double shifts to send money for his sister's cancer treatment. The housekeeper who hadn't seen her own children in 6 months because she couldn't afford the flight home to the Philippines. The groundskeeper delaying necessary surgery because he couldn't afford the recovery time without pay. Blake had built an empire while overlooking the people who kept that empire's foundations from crumbling. The invisible labor that made his visible success possible. Within a month, systemic changes swept through. Living wages across the board, comprehensive health coverage including family members, generous paid leave, and a fund for family emergencies. His accountant protested the expense. Blake fired the accountant. But the real transformation was personal. Blake restructured his entire schedule around Miles. Morning breakfast together, where he learned his son was obsessed with velociraptors and could name 40 different dinosaur species. How had he not known that? Bedtime stories became sacred. The routine he'd outsourced to Amara, he now reclaimed, and Miles, sensing the shift, began to open up in ways that broke and healed Blake's heart simultaneously. Weekend outings to natural history museums, parks, the aquarium, places Miles had talked about excitedly that Blake had never had time for. He discovered his son was funny, creative, brave in the way only children can be. When had that happened? Or had it always been there, waiting for Blake to notice? Amara returned after her sabbatical, but everything had changed. She wasn't staff anymore. She was family. The estate transformed from a house into a home. Staff dinners where people laughed. Conversations that went beyond assignments. Genuine relationships forming in spaces that had only known transactions. 6 months later, Blake threw Miles a birthday party. Not the extravagant circus events he used to hire party planners for, just family, which now meant Miles, Blake, Amara, and the household staff who become something more than employees. Miles blew out his candles and made his wish. Then he turned and hugged Amara so tightly she laughed. "I wish you and Dad stay forever," he whispered, not quietly enough. Blake caught Amara's eye across the table. She was crying. So was he. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that success means nothing if the people around you are drowning. Because the ending? It's everything. Word of Blake's transformation spread through Silicon Valley's elite circles like wildfire. At first, people whispered, called him soft, said grief had made him irrational. But then other families started asking questions they'd never asked before. How much do we pay our staff? Can they actually live on those wages? What sacrifices are they making that we never see? A quiet revolution began, not because of publicity or social pressure, but because Blake openly discussed his wake-up call at the charity galas and networking dinners he could no longer attend without thinking differently. At one event, a fellow CEO cornered him. "I heard you're going soft," the man said with a smirk, "giving away half your fortune to the help." Blake's response, overheard by half the ballroom, "I was always soft. I was just too afraid to show it." Amara taught me that strength isn't about building walls. It's about showing up for the people who show up for you. The comment went semi-viral in their insular world. Within months, Blake launched an initiative for fair wage standards in domestic work, collaborated with labor organizations to create industry-wide protections and benefits. But the real transformation remained personal, not public. Miles's anxiety continued to heal, not just because of Amara's care, but because his father was finally present, really present, not just physically in the room, but emotionally available, showing up in the ways that mattered. Amara's mother received a kidney transplant through a program Blake's foundation funded. She visited for Christmas, and Blake watched her hold Miles while he showed her every single dinosaur in his collection. She thanked Blake with tears in her eyes. He told her the truth. "Your daughter saved my son when I couldn't. This is the least I can do." 2 years after that night, Blake sits in his home office, watching Miles and Mara build a blanket fort in the living room visible through his open door. His net worth has actually increased. Turns out, investing in people creates loyalty and efficiency that no corporate strategy can match. But that's not what he measures anymore. Success is Miles running to him after school, bursting with stories about his day. Success is Amara comfortable enough to call him out when he's working too late, reminding him that Miles has a soccer game. Success is knowing everyone in his household can afford to live, not just survive, on his desk. In an expensive frame that costs more than it should, sit the crumpled bills he found in Amara's bag. He keeps them there as a reminder of what he almost missed. Reminder that invisible labor is still labor. That quiet sacrifice shouldn't be required for basic dignity. That the people we rely on most are often the ones struggling in silence. We're surrounded by people carrying impossible weight with grace. The nanny who raises our children. The teacher who stays late. The cashier working 3 jobs. The janitor cleaning offices after everyone's gone home. We see them, but we don't really see them. They have mothers needing dialysis. Children needing braces. Dreams deferred for our convenience. Lives complex and difficult and full, invisible behind their service. Blake's transformation started with truly seeing one person, recognizing that her poverty wasn't a personal failing, but a system he perpetuated, and choosing to do something about it. Here's my question. Who in your life is carrying more than you realize? The person who helps you might be drowning while keeping you afloat. Drop a comment about someone who deserves more recognition, more support, more than just a thank you. And if this story hit you where it counts, subscribe to Earthly Tales. We're telling stories about the quiet heroes we walk past every day. Hit that bell. Next week's story will remind you that the smallest act of attention can change entire lives. Evening light streams through Blake's office window, catching the frame on his desk. Next to those bills sits Miles' latest drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. My family, written in careful crayon letters. Dad, Amara, me. Below it, those crumpled bills in their expensive frame. A reminder that wealth without compassion is just numbers on a screen. But compassion with action? That's everything.